Good afternoon and welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture. Today I'm going to be bringing to you 5.5 years of experience growing our own food and growing enough for a year. I'm going to talk to you about some of our favorite vegetables and some of the easiest vegetables to grow and to get a whole lot of, and they're delicious and why, and I'll give you some advice for each. I'm also going to tell you about some of the vegetables that we're going to continue to grow, but we need to do things differently. And I'm going to tell you how we've done them and how we need to do them differently. And I'm also going to be telling you about some of the vegetables that we're not going to be growing anymore because we just don't think that it's worth the effort and we can get what we need from those vegetables from plenty others. And we'll let you know what those alternatives are too. And I've got all these cue cards here to kind of help me remember everything that all the different things I want to talk about, because I'm always forgetting stuff. So if you're someone who's just getting into growing your own food, or you've been doing it for a while and you just want some really useful tips, really useful advice that's going to help you do better, grow better, get more food, get better food, get food that you can grow while you're respecting nature and while you're basically celebrating nature all around you and actually having nature help you. If this kind of thing interests you, then let's get started. So much to talk about. Let's start with peppers. Peppers, it's one of my favorite vegetables. We're definitely going to be continuing planting those, but there are a lot of very useful things to know when you're planting your peppers. For example, first of all, it's best to start them in small pots, and if you're in a cold climate, you start them in small pots indoors or in a heated greenhouse. Not in an unheated greenhouse because it's going to be too cold in an unheated greenhouse. You get them started in small pots, but not too small. Okay, you'd probably the best size pot is about that big, that big, that tall, and so on. Anything smaller than that is too small. Why? Because your peppers need about 8 weeks before you transplant them out. And what you want to do is transplant them out when the danger of the last frost is long gone. Here, that's the beginning of June. Here in our 5B 6A garden, it's the beginning of June. First week of June, that's when we transplant. For you, it might be at some other point. And so they need to last a long time in those little pots. And so if you put them in something too small, they're going to get stressed. And if they're starting their life out stressed, they're not going to grow as well in the garden after you transplant them. A few other things, tips that are really important with peppers. When your peppers start to form their fruit, okay, you're gonna see maybe lots of flowers and lots of fruit on each plant. When the fruit starts to get shiny like this, okay, and it starts to change color like this, all right, or even when it's still green but it's shiny, and you've got maybe a lot of different peppers on the plant, and you've got some really tiny ones, and you got flowers and so on. Pick some of those green ones. So long as they're shiny, or that they've started to change color, you'll be able to ripen them inside in a sunny window, let's say. And that way your plant's going to have more energy to finish ripening the remaining fruit. All right. Now, sometimes you will see, I don't have an example here, but sometimes you will see at the bottom of the pepper, all right, you'll see maybe a little spot, a little bit of rot, maybe a little bit of mold, or it's just gone a little black or discoloring, or the skin is dried. That's what we call, actually you can see a little bit of it right there, all right? That's either sunburn, or if it's down here, it's blossom end rot, and it's often caused because of stress from too much sun, too much heat. This past summer we had a drought, and so there was way too much heat, not enough water, not enough rain, and so some of these peppers got this. And it's important that you pick them because they're not gonna ripen as well as the other ones, and the plant's gonna be trying to keep them healthy. So you pick those so that the plant has more energy for the rest of your peppers. And then you'll get more peppers, and then these ones that you pick that have those little spots on them, you ripen them inside, you cut those spots out, and you eat the rest that's still good, and you'll still get your peppers. Now, what else? Another good thing about peppers is they don't mind being crowded, as opposed to tomatoes. Tomatoes don't like being too crowded, especially in a rainy area. Tomatoes need their space so that the leaves can dry off and so on. Peppers don't mind it. In fact, peppers like being crowded because they like to give their fruit a little bit of shade with the leaves of the pepper plant itself, or other pepper plants around it. Or maybe a few other plants like sunflowers you might have growing close by. Sunflowers are a good companion plant for peppers. Oh, one last thing about peppers. Really useful piece of advice. Okay, so we've got different types of peppers. We've got like bell-type peppers. This is a relatively small bell-type pepper, but this is another bell-type pepper right here. It looks kind of like a cross between a bell and maybe something longer and thinner. And then you got these types of peppers and these types of peppers, which kind of look like hot peppers, but both of these are sweet peppers. This is a tequila pepper, and this is a Jimmy Nardello pepper. Here's another Jimmy Nardello pepper right here. Now, what I want to say about these is, I love hot peppers. They're great. And what's great about hot peppers is a hot pepper plant will give you lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of peppers. But let's say a bell pepper will give you nice, big, juicy peppers, but it won't give you necessarily as many. Same with this kind. But hot peppers, for instance, this is a poblano. The plant gives you tons, okay, because it's a hot pepper. And then you've got these peppers here, which are sweet, but they kind of look like a hot pepper, and they behave like a hot pepper. These long, thin, sometimes curved, smaller peppers, the plant will give you lots and lots and lots. And so I highly advise you to grow those types of peppers if you want a huge, abundant harvest. And they seem to be more resistant to the bugs as well, just like hot peppers, because hot peppers are resistant to the bugs as well. So there you go. There's some advice for peppers. Let's go on to the next thing. Let's go to something that I'm not going to plant anymore. I'm going to talk about some grains, all right? So I'm going to talk about barley and wheat and oats, okay? I'm not going to plant those anymore, and I'll tell you why, and I'm going to tell you what we plant instead. You know, because we make our own bread, and so we want to reduce the amount of flour that we buy, and we've got a solution for that. But we've been trying over the last few years all sorts of grains to see how well they do. So here we've got, for instance, some barley and some wheat right here, okay? And here too, here's some purple barley. And then here we've got some oats. Now, I'm not going to be planting these anymore, even though I've enjoyed planting them, I've enjoyed growing them. I love to just take the berries off of here and eat them and chew on them. They're really nice, but they're just not very convenient. They're not, I mean, as you can see, the plant is very, very small. And it doesn't give you a whole lot of grain per plant. And it's not very tall, but it's tall enough that it falls over, and it's so short that it's very easily foraged by animals, very, very easily foraged. And each plant doesn't give you a whole bunch. And so you need just way, way too much space to be able to get enough oats or barley or wheat. What we plant instead, and grows really, really well, we plant millet, which we've got here, a whole bunch of it. This millet right here is still a little bit green, but I picked it green just as an experiment to see if it will ripen well. Okay, and then here's some ripe millet. Now this millet here is foxtail millet, but that's not the only grain we grow. We also grow different types of sorghum. So we've got some coral sorghum here, and right here I've got some Williams syrup sorghum right there, and got some sorghum from a subscriber who sent me seeds this past winter. His name's Robert Resnick. And this is a type of hybrid sorghum that only grows to 1.20 meters to about 4 feet tall. So it's really convenient, and it gives nice big heads. You see how big those heads are compared to, let's say, the coral sorghum or even the Williams sorghum. And so I'm looking forward to trying these seeds, but what I can tell you is the birds love them, and so which means they're probably going to be really, really good. And another one that the birds really love, and the birds really love they love all the sorghum. They go after all our sorghum, which is fine and then we also have some popping sorghum. This is Alujola popping sorghum. Now, What's great about the millet and the sorghum is you see how big these heads are compared to these ones. Okay, there's a huge difference, and yet a plant of millet doesn't take up much more space than a plant of wheat or barley or oats. But look at how much more we get. The sorghum might take up a little bit more space, but really not much. So for the space, you get a whole lot more. Plus the coral and the Williams and the alujola is really, really tall. And so it's a little bit harder for the animals to get at. And then the millet and the and Robert Resnick's sorghum, it's a bit shorter. It's about 4 feet tall, but still it works really well. And so we're gonna keep growing that. And I've done a whole bunch of videos on those, and I'm gonna be actually doing a video about specifically about sorghum. So I'm not gonna give you millet. So I'm not gonna be giving you too much advice today. But what I can say is, in a cold climate, it works better. Here, let's say here in Ontario or any cold climate, 5A, 5B, 6A, whatever, it works better if you plant them in small pots ahead of time, about 4 or 5 weeks ahead of time. And you can plant several seeds in a pot because they're grass. They grow like grass. They don't mind being crowded. All of this sorghum you see here was all growing really crowded, and you saw how big the heads were. And so you start them in little pots about 4 or 5 weeks ahead of time, and then you transplant them into the garden, because even when you sow the sorghum, when the soil is the right temperature, direct sowing it here, it just takes too long. It takes longer for them to germinate than they do when they're in pots. And when the soil is the right temperature, you can just transplant the 4 or 5 week old plants that are already that big, and so they're just going to grow a lot faster for you and give you a lot earlier harvest. Next, let's talk about something that I want to do differently. So let's talk about onions. Onions. Now, over the last few years, I've been growing onion sets, and I've been also growing onions from seed. Now, but before I talk to you about the onions, I want to talk to you about the context of how we garden, and that's a really, really important point. How I like to garden is I like to garden imitating nature, using biodiversity. If you've seen any of my videos, you've seen what my garden looks like, you can see that it's just full of all sorts of plants. There's not even a hint of monoculture there. And so I do a lot of companion planting, and once the plants are established, I let the weeds grow, because they end up doing some companion planting as well. And also I don't water most of my gardens, depending on the conditions. There are a couple of small areas that need watering simply because of the soil conditions, but most of our gardens are placed in areas where there's water beneath the soil most of the year, even this year and during the drought, and so we don't water. We do very little weeding, and so the plants need to be independent. And so what that means is, in some cases, things might end up being smaller. Like you can see, these onions aren't very big. We don't fertilize. Like I said, we don't weed. We'll do some mulching. We'll do some weeding, especially for onions. It's important to weed around your onions because they really don't like competition. But otherwise, the plants really need to be independent. And so, for example, in order to get like really big onions I've seen people grow, I think you have to do a lot of fertilizing. The only fertilizing I could say that we do is in the fall. We will add mushroom compost to our garden beds in the fall, and then we'll add on top of it, we'll put leaves if we've got them, and then in the spring we'll either rake those leaves off or we'll leave them on if we can. And that's what basically is going to be the fertilizer for the year. And we'll also use our weeds as mulch, and so those weeds are going to decompose and also be a sort of a fertilizer. Otherwise, our plants really, really need to be independent. And something like an onion, well, it just doesn't get as big when you're not really paying close attention to it, because there's so much work that we basically ignore our vegetables most of the time. And so, however, they might not get very big, these onions, but they are beautiful, and they have more flavor than any onion that's 3, 4, 5 times bigger. These things have a lot of punch to them. A lot. They're really, really strong, and so you don't need to use as many. And so, what is my advice about onions? What am I doing differently? Well, what I've done in the past is I've direct sown them. I have sown seeds in pots, and I've used onion sets. And I find, at least in a cold climate, in our short seasons here in our 5B, 6A garden, the season's just not long enough for onions sowed from seed to do well. At least not in the context where, you know, we don't do much weeding and stuff like that. If we were only growing onions, we could probably grow them from seed. And I find growing them from seed indoors, starting in January or February, it's just so long. It takes so long. It takes up space. You have to be watering them. And we end up getting these tiny little onions that kind of look like onion sets. Whereas these are from onion sets. You'd think, well, why didn't we get anything bigger? Well, like I said, they have to be, sometimes, some years they've been bigger, but this year, like, it was a drought year, and so they weren't as big, but we didn't water them. And so I consider they did pretty well for that. And so that's what we're doing as of next year. I'm not going to be sowing onion seeds anymore. I'm just going to be using onion sets. I'll still collect onion seeds, more for using as a spice in the kitchen, but sometimes I might still direct sow onions around other plants as companion plants, but not necessarily to get a harvest. So I just sort of broadcast the seeds, and whatever wants to grow, grows. And on that subject, let's talk about something that I'm going to be continuing to grow, and that is garlic. Nothing better than having a whole bunch of garlic. This year we got about 565 beautiful heads like that. These are some of the garlics that the garlic heads that I'm going to be dividing up and replanting in late October or early November. And we're going to keep planting those. And actually this year we did it differently, and our garlic was so much better. It was a lot more potent, a lot stronger this year as far as its flavor, and the bulbs were bigger. Often when you get bigger bulbs, your flavor's not as good. And so what was the difference this year from previous years? Well, I followed a subscriber's advice, the Olson Pine, who said it's not good for garlic, you know, because I always thought garlic needed a lot of water. So I put it in a spot of the garden a bit lower, that always, you know, that I never ever needed to water and so on, because it was always fairly damp there. But as a result, I learned in 2024, when my garlic was so wet right up to the last minute, right up to when I harvested it. You know, normally it's good to let your garlic dry a little before you harvest it, and I couldn't. And so the bulbs weren't as big, and they weren't as flavorful as they were, for example, this year. They were still excellent. I still loved them, but they could have been better. And this year they were much better, even though we got some of those leek moths. But the leek moths didn't do much damage. They just they hatched their eggs in the garlic scapes. I cut those off anyways to harvest them, to eat them, so they didn't affect the garlic whatsoever. So garlic is a great one to plant, and it's a great companion plant. I have it, you know, I have one area where I plant garlic every year, but I also will put a bit of garlic here and there throughout the garden as companion plants, and those ones I don't harvest. I just let them stay in the garden. So one garlic clove that grows into a garlic, if I leave it there, well, the following year, that little area will turn into 4 or 5 or 6 garlic plants. And each year it'll get bigger and bigger. You can harvest the greens as for salads or for cooking with as well, and leave the bulb underneath. And it also acts as a companion plant for the plants surrounding it. So there's one that we're going to keep growing. Now, let's go on to something we're not going to grow anymore. Let's see. So let's say for a no here. One thing that I'm not going to try growing anymore is regular spinach. Regular spinach, it just bolts way too quickly. Actually, I'd say in that same category is coriander or cilantro. Bolts way too quickly. And so for the amount of work of getting it started, getting it growing, you get very little harvest out of it before it bolts. There are lots of vegetables that can take their place. For instance, you got Swiss chard, which really tolerates the heat quite well. Swiss chard. Obviously, kale and cabbage and all those things, they replace it well. In the early spring, you got sorrel. And one thing I like to plant is something called Malabar spinach. Now, I don't have a whole lot of it with me. I don't have any of it here with me. I've got some growing. I'll see if I can put an image on there. It's a beautiful plant. It's a little bit different from spinach, but it's a leafy green. Its leaves are kind of full of water. It's very tropical. It's a tropical plant. It only grows like, obviously it's only going to grow in the summer. You have to. The frost kills it. A beautiful plant too. A nice deep green with some red and burgundy overtones in it as well. And it grows into a vine. You can have it grow over an arbor. It's quite beautiful, and its flowers are pink. And actually, its seeds can overwinter and survive the winter here, because this year I got some Malabar spinach volunteers, which was quite nice. So there's a really nice replacement for spinach, and essentially for spinach. For cilantro, a good replacement would be, it's not exactly the same flavor, obviously it's parsley, but it's the same type of, looks the same anyway, but the flavor is completely different. Although if you want a nice cilantro replacement to give it, to do the same sort of things with the different ones that replace it, would be, for example, something called tchepiche. It's a Mexican herb. Really, really nice. Dill is actually a good cilantro replacement, and dill actually grows quite well here. I like to always collect the seed. It's really nice to collect the seed, and I grow our dill with the tomatoes. It's a really great companion plant for tomatoes. Another one is, another good replacement for cilantro is mint, any type of mint. For example, cilantro is very popular in Thai cuisine, and something else that you often will always see going with cilantro or replacing it is our different types of mint, either mint or basil, I should say. So we have, for example, here we have 4 types of mint: apple mint, peppermint, spearmint, and wild mint. And we also have three types of basil: Thai basil, Genovese basil, and purple basil. And they all grow really well. For the basil, it's important, obviously, to start it in small pots. We started in early May, and then we transplant it out when it's really, really hot. So like end of June is when we're going to transplant the basil out into the garden, or mid to end of June. Around the same time, we transplant the watermelon. And basil's a great companion plant for watermelon. They grow really, really well together. It's also a good companion plant for tomatoes. Now, as far as mint's concerned, sometimes it's a good idea not to put the mint in the garden, because it can really, really spread. We have mint in our garden. I don't really mind it how it spreads, because we harvest a whole lot of it. And then when it's time, let's say we harvest a whole lot of it throughout the season, but mostly in the spring and in the fall. So late fall, we'll harvest a whole bunch of it. And then in the spring, in late spring, we'll harvest it. Well, all through the spring, we'll harvest it, because it's going to be ready early in the spring. And then what happens is, when we want to plant something where the mint is going, we'll just pull it all out. And then we'll take all those, and because it pulls out really easily, we'll take those roots and we'll take those leaves out, and then we're going to throw them somewhere where we're building the soil, where the soil is having a real rough time getting built. Well, mint will definitely be able to help us build the soil there, and then we'll plant in there. And that's what we've been doing with our watermelon in our main garden and our basil, is we do that. We clear out the mint, we transplant the watermelon and the basil. It grows really well. And because we're clearing out the mint in about mid-June, what happens is the volunteer seeds for the ground cherries and cherry tomatoes that are there will also sprout at the same time, like maybe within a week of after we've transplanted the watermelon and the basil. The ground cherries and the cherry tomato volunteers will sprout, and they will be ready to harvest right around now in September, when the watermelon has long finished. And of course the basil's still growing, and those ground cherries and tomatoes love basil. So it really is a nice situation that really works well. Obviously, another good replacement for spinach is lettuce. And lettuce, like the dill, we will grow it as a companion plant for our tomatoes. Why is that? I'll show you. Here's our lettuce. It doesn't look much like lettuce, but that's our lettuce seed. That's our lettuce. That's good. That's a little, very tiny little bit of lettuce that has bolted and gone to seed. Because that's the thing. When we harvest our lettuce, we don't pull the plant. We cut the plant. Sometimes we'll just cut some leaves off if it hasn't finished growing. But once it's grown into a nice, big, beautiful head, we'll just cut it. Cut the plant and leave the base. And often there'll be more lettuce that we can again harvest. And we'll do it again the same way, and then at some point we'll just stop harvesting it. We'll let the plant grow, and what happens? Well, the lettuce is going to spike up and grow to about 4 or 5 feet tall. No, 4.5 feet tall. Let's say 1.20 meters to 1.50 meters, and it'll grow thousands and thousands of flowers. And around the same time as the dill will also reach its height, and then those. You see, the lettuce and the dill we plant sort of around on the outside of our tomatoes, and so what they're going to do is not only, the dill is aromatic, it's going to help the tomatoes, but the lettuce and the dill, when they're in flower, they're going to be in flower at the same time as the tomatoes are in flower, so they're going to attract all the pollinators. Plus, we like to plant, what's it called, indeterminate tomatoes, because they give you a bigger harvest, because they're the kind of tomato plants that grow everywhere, and we don't prune them, and so we do trellis them a little bit. I could use probably some more trellising for my tomatoes, but the dill and the lettuce, when they're really tall and they've got very, very strong stems, they help us trellis those tomatoes. We take some of those long vines that have some tomatoes starting to grow on them that might be trailing along the ground. We'll gently lift them up without breaking the vine, and we'll drape them over the dill plant, or we'll drape them over the lettuce plant. And then the tomato is no longer going to be lying on the ground. It's going to be hanging from the dill or the lettuce plant. So that really, really, really works. Okay, and another tip about tomatoes is if you found a tomato that you really, really like we have so many that are so nice. Look at these tomatoes. This is an Amana orange. This is it's either a Sicilian saucer or it's an Italian heirloom. I can't remember. And then this one here is a black crim, but it also could be a purple Cherokee. I'm not exactly sure the difference. I grew both and they looked exactly the same. They could be just two names for the same thing. So really lots of nice tomatoes. Then we got a whole bunch of these ones, which are called, they're aroma type tomato, except that they're purplish. They're called purple Russian. Really love these ones. Another one, they're all buried in my pot here, but I've got a miniature one, but they grow really, really big, like that big, are these ones, which are pink heart-shaped tomatoes. I think they might be the same thing as ox heart tomatoes. Really, really nice. And also I think they're the same thing as Joya de Oaxaca tomatoes, which they're all like, they've got pink, sort of a pinkish skin, and they're heart-shaped. Really, really nice. And when you found some tomatoes, you like them, well, and these are all heirloom, by the way. I tried the hybrids last year, didn't like them as much. And when you collect the seeds, you don't know what you're going to get. Whereas generally the heirloom seeds you collect will much of the time grow true. Sometimes they'll cross with other tomatoes, and then we get these new varieties. Same thing happens with the peppers, of course. Some peppers cross, and we get these new varieties. But if you found some tomato you really, really like, well, then when you cut it up to eat it in a sandwich, like I love to eat tomatoes in sandwiches. When I'm cutting it up, a lot of the seeds fall onto the cutting board, so I'll just keep them and just to go put them onto a piece of recycled paper, let that dry up, and once it's good and dry, then I'll just stick it into an envelope for next year. So there are some tips for tomatoes. Now I'd like to talk about something that we want to do differently next year, and that is cucumbers. Here's some advice for cucumbers. So here we got some cucumbers for you. Here's like a regular one. It's pretty small. Now, the way I've been gardening, cucumbers have not been something that's done particularly well here. I suppose if I concentrated on them, which I want to do next year, concentrate a little bit more on them, then we'll get more cucumbers. We did get quite a few, but the problem is the way I garden, because for example, I'll plant beans with almost everything. Well, they end up hiding everything. and the weeds I let grow end up hiding everything. And cucumbers are like onions, and they're like carrots. They don't like competition. They don't like having other plants around them. And so next year I'm going to plant at least 2 cucumber plants inside our greenhouse. Because you see, this is what ends up happening with me with my cucumbers, is I end up not seeing them until they turn orange or yellow. Because then you can see them in the background. I'm very lucky if I find one green. And so we get them like this. But even orange and yellow, it's fine. I mean, you can still, these are still really, really good for pickling. They're just not as crunchy on the inside, but they're excellent for pickling. And they still have all the good properties. And when they're this color, well, they're almost ready for collecting the seeds, if you like to collect your seeds. Now, next year, what am I going to do is I'm going to put the cucumbers, basically I'm going to isolate them like I've isolated in the past. I've isolated onions and carrots and sometimes even watermelon. I'm going to isolate them, but still do companion planting. Because when I've isolated some other plants in the past and almost done like a miniature monoculture, that's when I've run into problems. Like one year, in the space that I plant 24 tomato plants this year, I planted about 50 of them back in 2023, and I lost most of them to the blight. And however, luckily, and that's why I tried the hybrid tomatoes last year. But I knew why I lost those to the blight. It's because I didn't do companion planting with them. And so these last 2 years, I've been using the dill, the lettuce, the basil around the tomatoes, and in carrots too. They really work. They really help. And I've made sure I've given my tomatoes space. And of course, this year with the drought, there was no danger of blight because blight is a fungal problem. And when you got like 50 tomatoes crammed into a spot where you should only have about 12 of them, well, the rainwater is not going to evaporate off the leaves, and that's where you're going to have problems with blight. Because I don't do things like, I certainly don't use pesticides and chemical sprays and so on, but I also don't bother with the homemade ones, like using, I don't know, whatever, using soap or baking soda or whatever. I don't bother with any of that. And I don't use BTK either, because that kills, it might kill some of the bad bugs, but it kills the caterpillars of the good native bugs too, if they're eating at the same time as the problematic ones. So, but by the way, that year that we lost most of our tomatoes, one of them that survived was this one. And I made sure to keep the seeds, and look at what that's given us. It's just beautiful, 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 resistant to the blight. Another type of tomato that's resistant to the blight are, I'll show you. I'm not done talking about the cucumbers, but are any type of cherry tomato, like this one. I remember at the end of the season when I had already cleared out all those tomatoes that had died from the blight. There was like nothing left. And then like about 2 months later, I found a couple of these on the ground. And so somehow those plants had survived the blight. Not only survived it, but regrew. And so these are called yellow pear tomatoes. Another type that's really resistant to the blight are these. These are coyote tomatoes I got from Fruition Seeds several years ago. But I've been collecting the seeds ever since, and they always grow true. Same thing with these. I've had these since 1990 when I got some seeds from the experimental farm in Ottawa. And then here, these are Chiapas tomatoes, also blight resistant. I got these from Fruition Seeds as well, the seeds, several years ago. Okay, let's get back to the cucumbers. So that's what I'm going to do with the cucumbers. I'm going to isolate them. I'm going to make sure I trellis them well so they can grow up. I'm going to make sure that I water them at their base, just like you should do with pumpkins and squash, which are in the same family, just like you should do with watermelon, which is in the same family. Don't water on top. You might say, well, I mean, when it rains, they get watered on top. But the thing is, when it rains, it's different. You got different conditions. It's cloudy, it's not sunny, so you're not going to get any burn and stuff like that. You should never water anything while it's sunny, by the way. But and rainwater is different than whatever you might be watering from, maybe. There are a whole bunch of reasons, and they're not coming to my mind right now, but maybe I'll do a short later to talk about what's the difference between when they say you have to water at the base and don't water on top, because it can make the plant sick, and whereas rain doesn't, let's say. Well, anyways, I could get into that later. However, here's a cucumber that will do well even if your regular cucumbers aren't doing well. This is a cucumber that's really independent, and I call it a Caribbean cucumber, concombre des Antilles. It's also called a Caribbean gherkin, I think it's called, and it's from the Caribbean. Grows really nice. These are actually from Guadeloupe. These seeds. I actually got them from La Société des Plantes in Quebec, but that's where the seeds come from. And these don't look like they're very edible. In fact, they kind of look a little bit like wild cucumbers, but these are not wild cucumbers. They look spiny, but you can eat the whole thing. They're great for pickling. They taste just like cucumbers, and they're really nice. Well, it's nice to slice them and then eat them that way, or to pickle them, like I said. But they're really nice. Really interesting conversation piece too. Okay, let's continue. Something that I'm going to do differently here. Let's talk about cabbage. Well, the whole cabbage family I'm going to do differently next year. And I plant a whole bunch of things in the cabbage family. I plant curly kale, purple Russian kale. Sometimes I plant kohlrabi. This year I tried Brussels sprouts. I plant green cabbage. I plant this type of cabbage called red calabash cabbage, a really nice cabbage, nice purple cabbage. I've also planted broccoli and cauliflower. So let's start with the broccoli and cauliflower. I'm not going to plant cauliflower anymore, and I'm not going to plant Brussels sprouts anymore. I just find that they take up too much space. They require too much effort to do well. You know, if they get a small issue, like I said, I like my plants to be independent. And if they get a small issue, because I don't cover my stuff up with roll cover, well, that might be something I'll try next year for my cabbages. But any little small problem and the flower doesn't develop, and then you don't get a harvest. Broccoli I'm going to plant fewer, because once again I just find it takes up too much space for what you get from it. And what I'm going to plant more of is a lot more kale, a lot more curly kale, a lot more. Another kale we plant is dino kale and purple Russian kale. All three of those do really well, and they give us a lot of kale, and you can keep harvesting and harvesting and harvesting and harvesting. They keep giving and giving and giving and giving, and they give you the same nutrients as broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts, and of course so does cabbage. And we're going to keep planting cabbage, but I'm going to be planting less cabbage so that my cabbages can just be bigger. Again, I'm going to give them more space, and for a few of them I'm going to try some row cover so that I'm not, let's say, dealing with the bugs as much. However, the thing about cabbage and bugs is when the bugs will actually go after the cabbage when it's still very small. And they're going to go and get into let's say the center, and they're going to start eating it. But the thing is, they have like a cycle, and when their cycle's done, as long as your cabbage plant is healthy, it's going to keep growing. All of my cabbage got full of the cabbage bugs this year, in spite of all the companion planting we do, because it's probably a good idea to rotate them into very different spots. But then again, those white cabbage moths, they're everywhere all the time. And the thing is, they're an important species too, because if ever you wanted your cabbage seed, let's say, if you wanted to let it go to flower and go to seed, it's probably going to be those ones, the cabbage moths, more than anything else that's going to be pollinating them. Now, so the thing is, the cabbage is going to grow, and it grows from the center. So in fact, all the damage that got done was on the will eventually be on the outer leaves, like you can see a little bit right here. There was more on the other outer leaves. And also, when you harvest your cabbage, you'll see a lot of these things sometimes growing. You see that? They look like little Brussels sprouts. And so when you harvest your cabbage, don't harvest the whole plant, cut it, try and leave some of these there. And these little sprouts here will grow into new cabbages if you have enough time in the season. But even if they don't grow into big cabbages, they'll still grow into small cabbages that you can harvest. So there's some advice about cabbage. I'm going to try row cover on maybe 4 to 6 cabbages next year to see how it does. I've always been kind of skeptical about row covering, because with row cover, what you're doing is, okay, so you don't need the cabbage to get pollinated, because it's not going to flower before you harvest it. So the row cover is not going to stop it from being pollinated. But the problem with row cover is, yes, it might protect it from any aerial bugs, that are flying around. But what about the stuff that's coming out from the soil? It's not going to protect them from those. And in fact, those bugs that are going to come and start eating it from under the soil are going to have wonderful protection from the birds with the roll cover. So I've been skeptical about it. But next year, I'm going to give it a try. And we'll see how it goes. I've never done it before. We'll give it a try. Let's continue. Let's talk about some fruit. This is a really, really great fruit to have let's say in a food forest. This is quince. It's actually called purple flowering quince. There are 3 or 4 different species of quince. This one's called purple flowering quince, Chenomeles japonica. It's not native here, but the thing is, I planted this tree bare root in 2020, and it's been giving us big harvest since last year, since 2024, which is really nice because at the same time as planting this quince, I also planted bare root apple trees, bare root plum trees, bare root pear trees, and a few others. And they haven't really started giving much. We've gotten some plums, not a whole lot, not nearly as many of these, and we haven't really gotten any apples and pears. We do harvest pears from an existing tree that was dying when we moved here because it had its roots waterlogged all the time. So we fixed that problem, and we've had bumper crops for the last 3 years from that pear tree. Another tree, or shrub I should say, and the quince is actually a shrub. It's beautiful, beautiful shrub. Another one of those shrubs is that we planted at the same time back in 2020. It's hazelnut. Look at this beautiful harvest of hazelnut that we got this year, and we're not done yet. It's really nice. We still have a lot left, and today I'm doing an experiment. I harvested some while they looked still a little bit green, while they were still kind of a little bit stuck to the branch. But I want to test to see if they'll finish ripening. All the others I waited until they were brown and kind of like really hanging down and really easy to pull off the branch. So I'm going to experiment and see what happens with these guys, because it's nice to know that you can pick some things when they're not completely ripe, because that's one strategy of beating the animals to them, let's say, so you can get them before the animals. Because the thing is, we have lots and lots of animals that come around on our property, and that's fine. We're really happy about it because they actually help us with, and I've spoken about that in lots of videos, how birds and other animals have planted wild grapes for us. We get huge harvests of those. They've planted black-cap raspberries for us. We get huge harvests of those, and so many other plants. We have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of plant and fungus species on our property, whereas it was practically a grassy monoculture when we arrived back in December of 2019. However, one thing we do for the animals is far away from our garden, we'll plant stuff. For example, and also in our garden, we plant a lot of sunflowers. We plant lots and lots of sunflowers. Actually, we don't actually plant them. We only planted them in 2020. We planted them once. We basically didn't harvest them that year. I can't remember how many we had. Maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 10. I can't remember then. And most of them were the multiple seeds, although we had a few multiple flowered ones, although we had a few of the giant ones as well. And we didn't harvest them. We just let them stay there. We let the birds harvest them. We let the squirrels harvest them. And what the birds and the squirrels and probably raccoons did for us is they harvested them. They took some of them. Sometimes squirrels will take them away completely, like this one. They'll just take it off, take it away completely, and eat it somewhere else. And so they basically replanted the sunflowers for us everywhere. So why is that a good thing? It's a good thing because when lots of your stuff is ready to harvest or close to ready to harvest, so are the sunflowers. In fact, the sunflowers, the animals will go after them even before they're ready, and when they're ready, and after they're ready, when they're drying up. So there's a very, very, very long period of time. Sunflowers will start being attractive to animals probably at the beginning of August, right up until the end of the season, right up until the end of November, especially if you got enough of them. And so they will distract the squirrels, they'll distract the raccoons, the birds. For example, yellow finches, love them. If you like yellow finches, plant sunflowers. And we get so many, we have literally probably hundreds of sunflowers spread all over the land here. And so we do harvest some. And if you want to know when they're ready to harvest, when they're not, because you don't want them to be overripe, especially if you want to sort of eat them fresh, you want to grill the flower or something like that. Well, you harvest them when you see that the petals are starting to shrink and stuff. And then, like, don't wait until they're completely off, because the birds will have beaten you to it. Okay, so when you start to see kind of the petals start to fall, like when I took this, all the petals were there, but between the time I took it and doing the video, they all finished falling off. And so, like, anyway, so, but that's how you can get a harvest from your sunflowers. Now, some people I've seen, I've read, I've studied that sunflowers are allelopathic, meaning they're not good for other vegetables because of something that they express out of their roots. But that's only really if, your plant is here and your sunflower is here and the roots are basically touching. But if there's any distance between them, there's no problem. And in fact, the truth is, the sunflowers will benefit all their plants. Like, they'll benefit your tomatoes, they'll benefit your climbing plants. Your climbing plants won't benefit the sunflowers though. Like, if you got beans growing up your sunflowers, whoa, the sunflowers don't like it. They'll end up bending way over, because of course sunflowers like to be able to move. That's why they're called sunflowers. They like to tilt like this. So they're gonna tilt their flower to the sun. And so first thing in the morning, you'll see them facing in one way. Like, actually late at night, like before the morning, they'll be facing west. And then through the morning, you'll see them turn east. And then through the day, they're gonna turn back west again and finish the day west. And then when the sun rises, they'll start turning east again. And so if you got like beans twining up your sunflowers, it's gonna make it hard for the sunflower to make that movement. And it's gonna, it's gonna maybe fall over and that kind of stuff. But there's some advice for sunflowers. Okay, what else? Let me see. Well, let's talk about some squash. Squash is wonderful. These are a couple of my favorites. This is delicata squash, and then another one that's very similar in size but not in shape. It's a rounder type. It's more like this, but smaller. Is sweet dumpling. Those are probably two of my favorite squashes for their flavor, and even the seeds, which are tiny, they're so delicious. And another favorite, of course, is anything in the butternut family. Now, this is sort of a butternut, but it's more like a cross between a butternut and I can't remember the name, but it's a pumpkin-looking squash that has the same coloring as butternut. It's really big, and it's got these big lobes. It looks like almost like a Halloween type pumpkin, but like an old-fashioned, what do you call it? Fairy tale carriage type pumpkin with those big lobes, but it's this color and it's shiny. And then another one, this is a real miniature version, but usually they can be huge, is the crookneck, which is also in the butternut family. These are probably the most delicious flesh of all the pumpkin and squash, is the butternut family. However, a video you've probably seen, and here's another one of our favorites. It's the buttercup squash, which is a very similar flavor as to the acorn squash. So these are a bunch of favorites. Another one, I don't have it here for how it looks, is the Queensland blue. That's such a beautiful, beautiful squash because of its bluish hue when it grows. And then so when you harvest it, if it's still blue and then the flesh is bright orange, the contrast is amazing. But eventually it will ripen to kind of this pinky orange, which is really, really nice. Now, you've seen me talking about squash vines for supper. And so the only thing you need to know is the butternut type of squash, either the crookneck or the butternut or the other one that I spoke about. Those squash are recommended for planting if you want to have fewer problems with the squash vine borer. Why? Because the vine is hard, it's not juicy, it's very fibrous, and so the squash vine borer doesn't really like it or has a rough time boring into it. So they generally leave it alone, and they'll go after the Queensland blue. They love the Queensland blue. They'll go after that like a magnet. They'll go after, like sometimes I will plant a whole bunch of Queensland blue seeds 2 or 3 weeks before I plan on planting sowing my squash. Why? So the bugs all go to those ones, do their thing, birds will go after them, scare them away, and so on. And then when they're done their cycle, probably towards mid to end June, that's when I will sow all of my pumpkin and squash. When it's really hot, but early enough that we're not going to get into drought situations, because obviously pumpkin squash, they need their water. They need lots of water. But so I need to time it late enough so that the bug problem, I've already passed it. But the other thing is the squash love the heat, and if you sow them when you're basically mid to end June, they're going to sprout super fast within a day or two. I used to sow them in May, and they'd take sometimes a couple weeks to sprout, and then they'd grow slowly. So the bugs would go after them and basically decimate them when they were quite small. I don't like using row cover on them because when they start to flower, obviously, I don't like to bother hand pollinating them either. So I just like them to grow on their own, and so when it's already hot, they'll sprout quickly, they'll grow quickly, they'll spread quickly, and because they just love that heat. So there's some advice for squash. And another piece of advice, because I still love that Queensland blue, even though the squash vine borers love them too. What I do to prevent problems with the squash vine borer is, as soon as that vine is like turning into a vine, then anywhere where you've got a leaf node, and I will just show you that with this piece of sorghum here. Actually, no, I don't see any leaf nodes on there. I'll use this piece of garlic stem to show you. You see where the leaf meets the stem? Well, where the leaf stem meets the stem of the vine of the pumpkin, you're going to have like little bumps there on the pumpkin vine. So I cover those little bumps, either with mulch, with leaves, with weeds, or with soil, with compost, whatever you have to cover them, get them into closer contact with the soil, and those little bumps, those little leaf nodes will sprout roots. So that way, if this is your pumpkin vine here, and this is the base, this is the root here, and it's growing along the ground, and you've buried it here where there's a leaf node, and here where there's a leaf node, roots will grow, and often the squash vine borer, well, it's going to get at the plant early, so it's going to get at it near its base. Most often, you're going to see the squash vine borer damaged near the base, and so if it gets at it there, it doesn't matter, because you're going to have roots here, you're going to have roots here, and wherever else you buried it. And so your base is going to get destroyed, but the plant is still going to thrive. And in fact, with all those extra roots, if it doesn't get attacked by the squash vine borer, it's just going to be that much stronger. And if it does get attacked, well, it's going to do just fine. So there's some advice for squash and pumpkins. And another bit of advice for squash and pumpkins is sometimes your squash the fruit will start to grow even though it's not been properly pollinated. And so if you notice your fruit is staying really small, like these, look at these zucchinis here. Now these are relatively small zucchinis, but they're a size I like to harvest them at because they're nice and tender. I also like to harvest them bigger for using in bread and cake and stuff like that, and also for collecting seed and for having it stay through a couple months into the winter. However, sometimes the fruit will stay small. And if you notice it's staying small and it's really not growing, it's probably because it wasn't properly pollinated, and it'll probably end up rotting. And so before it ends up rotting, and also while it's still growing, the plant's going to try and get it to grow. It's going to try and it's going to try, but if it doesn't, and so it's going to take energy away from new squash that it wants to, that it might want to have grow. So you're going to get new little blooms with new little fruit at the base of them. With the female flowers, and they're just going to dry up because the plant's trying to get the little one to grow. So I'll cut them. If I see new flowers and new female flowers with the fruit at the base, I'll cut the small ones so the plant can give energy for those other ones. Okay, let's continue. So I'm almost done. I've checked my cue cards here because there's so many things to talk about. And let's talk about corn now. Corn is something where I put it under my no list, but it's not really a no list. One reason why it might be a no list is because I haven't tried nixtamalization yet. And nixtamalization is a process where you put your corn kernels into a lye solution or a baking soda solution. Like you can use a very clean ash from your campfire, let's say, if you didn't put any junk in there, and you can nixtamalize your corn. It's what they do in Mexico. It's what's been done for centuries and centuries, if not millennia, to make the corn something that you can actually absorb the nutrients into your body. It's where the word pozole comes from. It's where the word pozole is a soup made from nixtamalized corn, where you've got those swollen, because what the nixtamalization does is it swells up the kernel and it does something to it so the nutrients are available. And for example, the word tamal, a meal that's eaten in Mexico using corn flour or cornmeal. They'll either stuff banana leaves with them or they'll stuff corn husk leaves with them. And the word tamal, while you hear the base there is nixtamalization. So the tamal comes from that as well. The corn is only really of nutritional value if you've nixtamalized it, and I haven't tried that yet. I do want to try it though as soon as possible, and with the corn this year I'll probably give it a try. But the other reason why I might say no to corn, well, what the no is I'm not planting it this year. I didn't plant it in my main garden. I only planted it way out back, completely on the other side of the land. And why is that? It's because corn is a real magnet for raccoons and for deer and for other animals, for squirrels too probably. And so I don't mind the animals eating some of the corn, because so long as they eat it while it's still green and they don't tear down the whole plant, then the corn can still produce ears. And I've had that in the past, where the ears it produces are a bit smaller, but it still produces ears even if the first ones got eaten by deer or raccoon or anything else. But what I don't like is when they make a huge mess in the garden. When they're going after the corn and they're going through everything else, and they make a big mess and they knock plants down, and it just makes it's not pretty. Even though my gardens look really wild, as far as I'm concerned, I think they're beautiful. But I don't like everything to get torn down, and so I plant it way out back. It's there for the animals to eat. I make sure that I do the three sisters, so I surround them with as much squash as I can, and I put teepees up so beans can grow up the teepees and attach themselves to the corn stalks while they're also growing up the teepees. And so those bean vines are going to hold those corn stalks up on a windy day, because corn stalks all by themselves, they can often get knocked down on a windy day, or they can get knocked down by animals. But if they're attached to the beans, which are attached to the teepee, they're not going to get knocked down. And so this is how I like to do the corn. I do like to make it available to the animals, and then we harvest some of it. And no matter what, we always get lots of beans and lots of squash. And the thing is, we also plant beans everywhere else in our garden, and we also have a pumpkin and squash patch. And so we not only plant the pumpkins and squash with the three sisters, we plant it elsewhere. Next thing I want to talk about are potatoes. Now, I haven't done the harvest yet, but I'm going to show you these because this is a little bit interesting. My advice about potatoes is be careful where you plant them, because you don't want them near your tomatoes, because potatoes can carry the potato blight and the tomato blight, and the blight can pass from potatoes to tomatoes, so you don't want your potatoes to grow near your tomatoes. And the thing is, wherever you plant potatoes, they're going to come back, because you can't kill them. They come back. At least here, they've come back every year. Wherever we've had them planted, wherever we've thrown a potato because it had gone bad and we threw it in the compost, it just regrew. And here's what I can show you about the tenacity of potatoes. These, which of course do not look appetizing at all, these are a couple of dried up purple Peruvian potatoes, which when they were freshly harvested, it would have been at the harvest last, let's say October of 2024, I would have harvested them. And then of course I kept some just in case I needed for seed. Now in the end, I didn't plant potatoes this year because I knew they'd all come back, and they all did come back. So all the potatoes I kept for seed, I didn't do anything with them. They stayed in my garage in a box in the dark, and these shoots here have been there since like March or April. These shoots have been there, and look, the shoots aren't dead. They've been sitting in a box, no soil, no watering, no light. They've been sitting in that box since October or November of 2024, and since about March or April of 2025, they've had these little shoots on them, and they're just now, of course, I feel kind of bad because they're probably kind of suffering, but anyway, I could plant these and they will grow after sitting in a dark box with no soil, no water, no light for almost a year, and they would grow. These are purple Peruvian. I don't know if all potatoes behave this way, although all our potatoes come back, all the different varieties come back. So my advice about potatoes is be careful where you plant them. And we let the squash bugs do their thing on the potatoes. Although next year I might try just shaking them off and onto little blankets and then throwing them, into prairie type areas so the birds can more easily get at them. But generally, I've let the potato bugs, let's say, have their fill of the plants, because generally what happens is they have their fill, they've finished their cycle, the potatoes have lost a lot of leaves, and this is usually by about mid-July this happens, maybe end of July, but then there's still tons of season left for the potatoes to bounce back, put all their vines back, and keep growing, and for the potatoes to fill in. This year, however, with the drought, the potatoes had a real rough time in one area where they got lots of bugs bouncing back. And so what I should have done was shaken those bugs off earlier in the season. But I didn't. And I don't know if I'm going to do it next year. We'll see. We'll have to see what the harvest looks like. And we have potatoes growing in so many different spots. And in the other areas, they did quite well. So that's what you got for potatoes. Okay, what else? I talked about beans. Beans are great. Easiest thing you can grow ever. And if you're vegan or vegetarian or whatever, and you need a source of protein, well, beans are the best. And you can make tofu out of beans. You can make all sorts of different stuff out of beans. All right, beets. Here's one that's really good. I actually don't have any here to show you, but beets are amazing because they tolerate the weeds around them. They're one of the best ones to kind of like the way that we garden, and they're really, really healthy, so full of antioxidants. I just love them. And surprisingly, with beets, I also plant them in small pots ahead of time, but I only plant one seed per small pot because the seeds are composite. And so you'll end up having 2 or 3 beets inside that little pot growing, like 2 or 3 sprouts. And then when you transplant them into the ground, you leave them together, because the thing is, they'll all grow stuck to each other, and they'll grow at different speeds. Let's say you'll have one bigger before the other 2, let's say, and so when you can harvest the one and then leave the other 2 so they have time to get bigger and so on. You just have to, let's say these are my beets, and this is the big one and this is the small one. Well, I'll put my finger on the small one to keep it in the ground, and I'll pull the big one out of the ground, and then the small one can keep growing and get bigger. So there's some advice about beets. Now here's a no one, one that I unless I decide to plant it in pots. Rosemary is a plant that there's so many of our herbs, like they come back every year. I'm talking about thyme, lavender, sage, catnip, all the mints, oregano, you name it, all of those things, yarrow, there's a long list of them, and they all come back every single year. But the one for our 5B 6A garden, rosemary doesn't survive the winter. The only way I've gotten rosemary to survive the winter is by just planting it in pots and bringing those pots in for the winter. But I find that's a lot of work. However, we're doing a special project this year. We are installing in front of our garage doors we're installing in front of them greenhouse type doors that are basically going to cover the garage doors, but be far enough in front of them they're not going to cause any problems with opening and closing the garage doors. We're just not, we never have a vehicle in there, and so what basically we want to turn the basically front area of our garage into a bit of a greenhouse for the winter, because it will hold on to the heat better than an outdoor greenhouse. And basically what we will do during the daytime when it's sunny is we will open the garage doors, and then the sun will pour in, because our garage, our garage doors face south, and so the sun will pour in, heat up the garage. And we have a few, like we have a couple lemon trees. Friends of ours just gave us a little fig tree, and I also have a couple rosemary plants in the garden. I might dig those up, put them in a pot. I might even try overwintering a pepper, you never know, and we can do that in the garage. But I've always found overwintering more work than it's worth, but we'll see. I do it with our tropical plants, with our papaya. I've got a type of bursera, a copal blanco, that I grew from seed. Over 10 years ago I started growing it, and it's quite beautiful. It's in the frankincense family. Of course, those I keep indoors through the winter. So there are some plants I do that with. Another no is cantaloupe and sweet potato. Watermelons do really well here. Cantaloupe, not so much. And I'm not as much of a fan of cantaloupe anyway. So the effort to get it to grow well, I figured no, I'm not going to bother with it. Another one is sweet potato. I've tried it a few times, but it's just not warm enough here. If I could get slips of it in the spring from an Asian grocery store, because they sell them like it's spinach, then I could probably grow it more quickly. A friend of ours starts them in February inside with a whole ton of grow lights and stuff. But once again, that's just, I find that's too much work. Even though I do love sweet potato, and I say I'm not going to grow it again, but I don't know if I'm going to stick to that or not. Yes, of course, it's edible flowers. So many wonderful edible flowers out there. The petals of sunflowers are edible. In fact, the whole flower is edible, and we grill them sometimes. And hollyhocks, I've got the list here: hollyhock, calendula, evening primrose, marigolds, nasturtium, wild bergamot, tchepiche flower, anise, hyssop, you name it. All these flowers are edible, and they're just so wonderful. You add them to salads and stuff like that. Really healthy. You can make syrups out of them, you can make candy out of them, and they're pretty. And the more, of course, that you pick those blooms and you don't let them go to seed, well, the more blooms you're going to get. So you get flowers all summer. Last but not least, one of my favorite plants, because I'd love to replace my kitchen sponges with them, and I'd like to use them in the shower and all the rest of it. Luffa. It's not something I grow to eat, but it's something that I grow to use. I've used the loofah that I grew last year. It works so well. It works well for washing the dishes. It works well for, let's say, scrubbing potatoes or carrots. You're not using microplastics to scrub those potatoes and carrots. You're using loofah, and it does a real good job. And also for, let's say, what's it called, exfoliating in the shower, really good as well. Loofah, excellent plant, but I haven't perfected it yet. The drought wasn't good for the loofah this year, although we've got a number of them growing. I'll show them to you when they're ready. But you see, last year I planted the loofah in the same spot as the birdhouse gourd. But the birdhouse gourd grows like crazy here. And so that's another one. That's another yes, by the way. Birdhouse gourd is just so much fun to grow. And so I'm going to keep growing that. But I don't grow it in the same place as the loofah, because it smothers the loofah. Now, I started my loofah. I got it growing. And once I saw it was growing, I added beans to where the loofah was growing, because I figured the loofah wasn't going to cover my cattle panels, and so I grew some beans to fill in the holes. Well, the beans just went crazy. I tried trimming them, but they just kept going crazy, and so they kind of shaded out the loofah, I find, a little bit this year. So next year, what I'm going to do differently with the loofah is, first of all, when I started in I think it's March or April, I can't remember. I think it's probably late March when I started. I'm going to start it at the same time as the peppers in big pots, at least that big, you know, rather than the tiny little ones I use, the little like whatever cells. I'm going to start them in big pots so I don't have to, because a few of them I transplanted them while they were still indoors into bigger pots, and that's no good. Anything in the watermelon family, the pumpkin family, pumpkin, squash, loofah, cucumbers, watermelon, all that stuff, they don't like being transplanted. So if you're going to transplant them twice, forget it. And so I'm going to put them into bigger pots. And I don't like to use the pots that decompose, because they always get issues. I've had issues with them in the past. So I just plant them in pots and make sure they're really, really healthy when it's time to transplant them. And it's really, really hot out. We're talking probably end of June is when I'd transplant them. And I'm going to wait until I see a good, healthy growth, probably probably by mid-July, when they've maybe reached halfway up the cattle panel. Only then will I add the beans, because the thing about beans is, you know, they like the heat. You can plant beans here in our 5B, 6A garden as early as, let's say, the last day of May or the first week of June. And you can direct sow them and they grow quickly. But you don't have to plant them that early. You can plant them as late July and still get a harvest. You just won't get as much of a harvest. We plant them so we can harvest in the month of August. We harvest our green beans, whether they're purple, yellow, or whatever color they are. We harvest them in August while they're green, as in not ripe, as in haven't formed their seeds. And then once we've harvested enough of them, by the end of August, we've harvested enough, they'll last us all year. Then what we do is all the rest of the beans that are still on the vine, and because we've been harvesting them, there's still many more on the vine, because they don't give up until they've managed to ripen some dry seeds. So all the rest of those beans, we let them keep growing until they dry on the vine, and that's when we harvest them to have our beans. So that's one of our main sources of protein that we can grow here. We don't have animals. We still have at least 7 or 8 liters of dried beans from 2024, which are going to last us up until maybe December. And we're about to start harvesting our dried beans in October already, and we still have a ton left from last year, because beans are really, really versatile. You can do a whole lot with them. So I think I covered all the bases. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something from it. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends. Please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment or ask a question. I love to answer your questions and respond to your comments. And you know, when you do that, it's a real help. And in fact, I considered giving this message closer to the beginning of the video. You know, if you watch a lot of our videos and you really enjoy them and you'd like to see more, and you'd like to encourage that these videos get done, then supporting us by giving it a like or subscribing if you haven't done that yet, or sharing it with your friends. And something else you can do now is you can hype them, you can hype the video. All that stuff basically is a real help. It'll really help us. It'll allow us to get more views, and with more views we might get more longer views, because people who enjoy us might find us, and that will just help us out, because we earn a little bit of money from these videos, and believe me, that's a real help. And so if you could help us out that way, we would really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.